See, I owe you a study guide by Friday. We have another 3 chapters going on this week, and then we'll have an exam week on Friday. Same intro announcements as usual. Last time we were diving into this concept of game systems and what are game systems, and we're going to start diving into what kinds of resources exist so that when you are creating your own games, you know exactly what you have available and what those resources can do for you. So the first of those resources is time, of course. Time is an incredibly important resource, not just for creating time limits for things, but creating a space for which time is a resource. So it becomes a very important resource, even if you don't think that you're not creating time as a resource that has value in the game. Thinking about just from the basics of the length of a game, the length of the game that you create is a resource. You're asking people to spend that much time to play your game. For every level that you create, why is a player going to engage with it? There is time associated with that, but it's also a meta variable for a bunch of other underlying systems. Something like, how long does a random encounter take in an RPG? That's an underlying time-based system. So at a macro level, there are high-level gameplay plans like if you're planning a 10-hour RPG, how does that differ for if you're planning a 100-hour RPG? There's a very different time scale associated with, just from the conception of the game, how many battles are there going to be per level? How is the story spaced out? How are you keeping your audience engaged over a 100-hour time frame? You make very different decisions when you're scoping a project that is that size, knowing that the player needs to be engaged for that. So things like how many levels will the player gain over the course of those 10 hours or those 100 hours? On average, what's the deviation? Someone who grinds a lot in the final zone before a final boss or goes and does optional content before fighting the final boss in an RPG, what level will they be? Someone who bum rushes the story and wants to make it as difficult as possible because they want to just complete the game, get the achievements, and move on to the next game. What level are they at the end of the game? Depending on how long this takes, how many level ups is the player receiving per hour? How many stages of content need to be designed? All of this is related to the time that we anticipate the game taking to complete. If you're designing each level at a particular difficulty level with a particular number of enemies, then how does that fit within the scope of the rest of the game? What enemies were hard enemies at the end of one level can become easier enemies as you progress, and that can be one way that the player feels the power growth that they have accrued. What used to be a difficult encounter is now an easier encounter, even if those enemies stay consistent across the different level progression. What are their stat gains per level? Skill points per level, assuming your game has stat points and skill points, but things like how frequently is the user being rewarded with this throughout their gameplay? How does the rate of growth at the beginning of the game compare to the rate of growth at the end of the game? How are enemy lists associated with time? What enemies are available? How frequently? How difficult are they? What level of mastery does the player need in order to defeat said enemy? How long have they had to practice the game systems before you throw that enemy at them? So lots of time-based considerations. There can be things like, is the game turn-based in real time? If it's turn-based, how long will it take the user to be able to think of the appropriate actions to take and input those commands? How long is a typical turn going to last? Thinking about the passage of real time and game time, things like, if it's going to take you 5 days to complete this, how long is the arc of the story? Is the story also spanning about 5 days so that 1 day of gameplay is 1 day of game time? Or is it spanning 5 years where 1 day of gameplay is 1 year of game time? That changes a bit of how you show the story, a bit of how you can introduce mechanics. So a turn in D&D can take 20 minutes to decide what you're doing, but narratively, the idea of a turn in D&D takes about 6 seconds of game time. So it makes for a very paused strategic feel to the combat rather than a very fluid, real-time action-based combat. But that's based on the design of D&D. It's meant for you to think through all of the actions that you have available and to select the best one, because the difficulty of the game says that if you don't do that and plan with other player characters, that you might not win. There might be repercussions from that. So it leads to the feelings that the players are supposed to experience in the game based on that design. On the other hand, it's fun to think that Diablo was originally a turn-based concept. Interesting to think of how that game would be different as opposed to a modern action RPG if it were a turn-based encounter. What do we think? Anyone who has played action RPGs? What would it be like to play action RPGs if they were turn-based?
Does that count as, well, I guess maybe it's kind of evolved since then, but the original Baldur's Gate game would have benefited from just being turn-based, I think, because that pause and like play is very unfun to me.
Yeah, very interesting to think of, because it was real time that you then paused, entered commands, and then unpaused, and they did those commands.
Because that's the funnest part, is actually having like control over your characters. Because watching them passively do something, it's like, I'm not engaged with this now.
Right.
So, I don't know.
Right. It makes sense.
I guess maybe it could kind of feel like how I think the combat is in the first couple like Fallout games. You're kind of on that grid and you're moving around.
Yeah. It doesn't feel very action oriented. And when they went the first person shooter route of Fallout, it really changed the dynamic of actually feeling like you're living in a post-apocalyptic wasteland. And then they made the story worse to come from that.
Maybe.
So, of course, you can use timers to force players to make decisions in a set amount of time. This is an anti-strategizing technique, usually, where the flow of the game, you can think of it like if you're in the middle of a sword battle, you can't just say, all right, opponent, stop. Stop what you're doing. I'm going to think about this for a bit. And when I say unpause, you'll come back at me again, and I'll know what I want to do. That isn't particularly realistic. So if there's any real-time fluid action, timers that force you to, if it is turn-based and requires some strategic thinking, make it so that there is an associated cost to the time that you spend thinking. This is what the active time battle system in Final Fantasies did for a very long time, is it was turn-based. Your turn came up when your wait bar was over, but the amount of time it took for you to think and enter commands, there was still action happening on the battlefield. So if you took too long, the enemies would get extra turns while you're sitting there thinking about what to do. So you had to prioritize decisions to make and how quickly you were making them so that you could enter the next character's commands in more of a, it is turn-based, but it's real time, and that everyone's actions are coming around again, and you want to start the timer for this character waiting until its next turn is available. So even that is a timer, but it's not necessarily a timer with a time associated with it. It's more of a progress bar, filling up to your next turn. So yes, games can blend both of these. We talked about Blitz when we talked about prototyping. That's an example of blended turn-based in real time. Mario Party, lots of other games that blend turn-based in real time. But I think the most important distinction here is making a decision about how your game feels to play that is based on both the narrative concept as well as the amount of strategizing that you want your player to be doing. It should make sense within the physics of the world, but it should also lead to and play into the narrative. Another player expectations for time. Don't go too long without rewarding the player for the time that they've invested in your game, especially as the world evolves and more of the world is Gen Z and more of the world is Gen Alpha. There's an expectation that I played this game for 5 seconds, I'm going to be rewarded. That time frame is getting less and less. If you don't reward me within 5 seconds, I'm turning your game off, deleting it, requesting a refund. So designing to the expectations of being rewarded over time can absolutely be a challenge if you want to hold that back or expect the player to learn their systems on their own without being rewarded for every little thing that they do. You can think of how player expectations change depending on the game genre. If they're playing single player or if they're playing an MMO, something that is supposed to be a long-term investment of years and years of time. If you reward the player every 5 seconds over years and years, either the rewards are meaningless or you have to build very incrementally to the point where a real reward is 20 partial rewards, and each of those partial rewards is 20 partial rewards, and each of those rewards is 20 partial rewards. And now every 5 seconds you're getting a partial reward that can't do anything by itself. We have to collect enough of them to make and craft the thing that is the thing that does something. And that's the direction that I feel like a lot of games have gone, that is rewarding you very frequently with items, partial items, or items that have no value until you combine them with other items. Yeah.
A lot of MMOs have like, really rare drop systems for houses or raids or whatever.
Yeah.
So it's almost like the reward is just getting the roll.
Yeah.
Even if you don't actually get anything, just
Right.
getting like the rolls pop up and having a chance at it.
Yeah.
Like gambling.
Yep. And you have to turn that into a very, very low probability in a multiplayer game. We'll talk about game economies. We'll have a whole unit on game economies eventually, because that ends up being a very important component of a multiplayer environment, is making sure that things are dropped at a rate that what is supposed to have value has value. How do you figure that out? You can balance the complexity of actions, having a set number of action points per turn. Some actions that are more powerful will cost more action points. Other ideas, cooldowns, especially in MMOs, abilities or skills that are powerful enough that you don't want players spamming them. So introduce a cooldown to allow them to intelligently use them at the right moment to gain a benefit from that powerful ability. A lot in RTSs and mobile games, production or build times, you spend the resources to produce the thing, but then have to wait a set amount of time before that thing is ready to use. So that further also emphasizes planning, the need to assume that there's going to be a period of wait before you can utilize. There's no instant gratification. Spend the resources, thing is immediately available. And that is another way that time can be used. So time, very important for all sorts of things. Movement speed, another time-based. You think about this in terms of how fast your character reacts, but really it's about minimizing the time of going from point A to point B. So how fast you move through the game world changes how the player perceives the size of the world, how they perceive things like, do they have the ability to sit back and take note of beautiful scenery, or are they moving so quickly that they're just intently focused on pathing? How do I get there? How do I get there? And they're not looking at the scenery that's around them. Different games will prioritize different ends of that spectrum, but again, you should design for what you want the player to experience. Do you want it to feel atmospheric? Have the character move more slowly through the game world. You want it to feel very action-oriented, or getting to the destination that they're supposed to go to, increase the player's movement speed. What other systems can be affected by things like movement speed? Yeah. Combat, absolutely. If it's the combat takes place on the game world or in the game world, then your speed is the ability to dodge incoming attacks. It's your ability to place yourself behind an enemy with relative speed. So things like the encounter rate. If there's a spread of enemies around the map, if you move faster, you're spending more proportional time fighting. If the encounter takes 10 seconds, if it takes 10 seconds to get to the next enemy, then you're fighting half the time. If it takes you 5 seconds to get to the next enemy, you're fighting 2/3 of the time. The perceived size of levels, absolutely. Ease of controls. If your character is moving so quickly, it might make the character more difficult to control, especially if you need finesse in a combat system. Yeah, as mentioned, your ability to dodge attacks. If your character moves quickly, you can get out of the range of an attack with less movement, and that means you have more time to react before the dodge is successful. Many more, but things like that. Yeah.
You put this in the same realm of crafting games or survival games where you have access to like horses or cars or something that gives you further actions be better before.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So you can change the mode of travel and the speed of that travel for different reasons. Walking around on foot isn't necessarily the only way to do it, and it might be the way to traverse in I'm ready for combat, but get up on a horse, and now you are traveling and not as ready for combat. You get in a car, and now you're very not ready for combat because you have to be driving.
Or even something like Katamari, where like your movement speed is constantly increasing as your size is increasing and the
Yeah.
world keeps growing.
Right.
So something that used to take a long time to traverse all of a sudden is something you can pick up with your
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah. That was a very engaging series.
Yeah.
I don't know how that was dreamed up, but I don't know what the creator was on, but
Oh, it's one of the best.
yeah, it's gotta be the best thing.
I think they're just Japanese.
Something interesting with movement speed and the game world is in Terraria. There's a lot of mounts to help like explore the world a lot faster,
Right.
and they're not really built for combat, but they get really like you can intricately put them in the combat system by mounting and dismounting mid-fight, since there's no like
There's no land.
animation or anything.
Yeah.
So you're just on the mount or not.
And that creates kind of an interesting situation. It leads to the player having a lot more agency, but also rewarding the skill of being able to do that or not do that in a reasonable amount of time mid-combat. Yeah, becomes a skill factor.
You're designing a game and you want to document your time, resources, you make like a table.
Yeah, so I would keep track of what is it that the player needs to be able to do within this world, and then how long will it take to do that, so that you can run a meta-analysis on. You could analyze a particular player's playthrough of that and see how much time are they spending on combat, how much time are they spending walking around, how much time are they spending pathing to something of interest.
But if you documented that like in a table, like we talk about tables, right? You have a column be columns and rows, like rows would be action, columns would be some time. Something like that.
Yeah, I would do something exactly like that, where you either have individual events that you notice or cumulative sums for different tags of activity. And that allows you to see how is the player spending their time in your game. And that can lead to balance, not numerical balance or winning and losing balance, but player retention balance of am I using the player's time effectively? How are they spending time in the game? When I get feedback like, it takes me too long to move from point A to point B, you actually have the data to see when were those transitions that they're talking about. Is it every transition, or is it just that there should be fast travel between these locations? If you make the player's movement faster in general, then it changes combat. It changes a bunch of other systems that you may not want to be changing. But the more information you collect, the more you'll be able to surgically change what is important to change the player's feedback, the player's frustrations with your game. So to me, it all boils down to data. But then again, I'm a very data-driven person. So I would probably argue that more than the average person. That said, when you have data in front of you, the correct choice becomes obvious a lot faster than just someone had that frustration, now let's go brainstorm. My natural reaction is, let's go look at the data. So that's time. Currency is another big game resource. So I would argue that time is the biggest game resource. But currency is also very important to the player's experience. And every game has some kind of currency, whether they label it as currency or not. So there's a monetary currency, but even experience is a currency that you acquire and can use for benefits. So currency, anything that can be exchanged for other resources or information or time saving. Free-to-play games have premium currency. Represents the translation of real money into the game world. There's in-game currency earned by a player through their actions within the game. Real world currency, real money for a chance to win real money, as in like a gambling game, or game assets that can be purchased with real money. Whether they'll stay game assets forever, we don't know. Eventually, either Star Citizen will be released and I'll have to change this to something else, or it will forever be a meme that I can use for decades.
Yeah, it's like, Star Citizen is an anomaly. Like, what the hell is going on? I saw a
Billions
gameplay
of dollars.
footage like years ago, and it's like,
Oh yeah.
is it still happening? I'm still happening? Is this a money laundering scene? Like, what's going on?
Thought I shipped in that game in 2013.
Oh no!
Well, how much was it?
20 bucks.
Oh, okay, well, I mean,
Okay.
it's not like
I've heard
1,000
crazy
better
ones.
ones.
Yeah. Yeah, I was aware of it being around as I think even earlier than that,
If you
which is absolutely wild.
I swear to God, if that game continues on, it might be Duke Nukem Forever for like longest development cycle. If it ever comes out, that's waste.
They can rename it at some point. Duke Nukem literally forever.
Yeah.
And of course, there's pay to win currency as well. Real money can be exchanged for just saving time. It doesn't give you a premium currency necessarily, but it is a speed up of time or manipulates the time variable in some capacity. So all sorts of different currency types.
Star Wars Battlefront 2, that's one that comes to mind. Why do you have to pay so much to be bigger?
Because people will do it.
It's supposed to give you a sense of accomplishment.
Why are Super Bowl ads so expensive? Because people will pay it. Eastern paid for 2, apparently.
Wait, have this college's like games involved or something?
Mhm.
Yes, I saw it. I figured it was just for the local channel.
Yeah.
Yeah, I did see that.
Well, the local channels run premiums on Super Bowl commercials also.
Yeah. Got 55,000 hits, apparently. Web page hits from those 2 ads.
Wow.
All right, game-specific objects. These are things that players collect or find or acquire in some other capacity. Then they can be used immediately or at some time in the future. And that helps to make the player stronger or allow them to do something they couldn't otherwise do. Could be a one-time use item, could be a permanent item, some kind of specific item. So something like wood in a real-time strategy game, or bullets in a first-person shooter, or healing potions in an RPG. As the game gets more complicated, resources can appreciate or depreciate in relative value to the player. So something like you can have an early game health potion that heals a reasonable amount in the early game, that if you still have it in the late game, doesn't heal very much and it's kind of useless. It doesn't outpace the damage growth in the game, and that's a reason to use the healing potions earlier in the game rather than hoarding them. That's the game telling you there will be better items later. Use the items that we give you. And then there are players like me who just end the game with hundreds of early game health potions.
Why do you save them for later?
Can I trade these for something?
At least in Terraria, you can sell them to merchants.
Yeah. Can I trade these early game health potions for some of my sanity back?
Or you're just in like against a boss fight in Skyrim, just pounding the X button on the way.
If there's no cooldown, so if there's a cooldown in an action RPG for a low value potion, it's like, all right, I can heal 10% of my life over 6 seconds repeatedly when it takes 2 hits to kill me. Useful.
Just don't get hit.
Yeah, that's a better
Yeah.
answer. Get good.
Yeah.
Hit points and lives. Managing HP, it's true in most games have some level of hit points, even if they're hidden from you. There is some level of you're on low life in a first-person shooter where the screen flashes or turns gray or something that tells you that you take another hit, you're going to die. So even if the hit points aren't immediately on display, there's something being tracked that is related to hit points behind the scenes. Obviously, both players and enemies have them. Lots of game decisions can turn decisions into interesting decisions by incorporating or manipulating HP values. So a lot of this comes into the balance of the game. If the game is too easy, then HP has next to no value to you. It's just a very large number of tankiness. Or if the game is too difficult, then it doesn't matter how much HP you have, you're going to be one shot regardless. So balancing the game to have the level of difficulty that you want, the level of back and forth that you want between players and enemies will be important for that. You can change HP to be a resource that's not just tanking damage. You can have skills that use HP instead of mana, or you can start to utilize health as a resource outside of just health, which a lot of games that do that can be very interesting. Experience and levels, any progression, growth over time. This is the dopamine that you receive when playing a game, going from your current state and thinking about, I could be more powerful if I, what? So experience, successfully completing game tasks, levels at experience point thresholds, we all know this, but there can be other experience and levels, things like faction experience, tracking how you are perceived by non-player characters or groups in the game. Very useful. Skill levels, how proficient are you at a particular skill, either gained at level ups or through repeated use of the skill. I tend to find that games where you do something, you get better at it, are more interesting than games where you assign skill points. It just feels more realistic to do an activity, get better at an activity. Seems to be a little underutilized. Things like ranks, instead of having a number that gets very large, you can have words. So things like Joe, who is a novice thief, has gained proficiency in the thief class and is now a skilled thief. Instead of going from thief level 1 to thief level 2, which, what does that mean? Now we're attaching a name to the concept of that rank in a way that has additional meaning in the game world. Like, oh, wow, a skilled thief, that must mean that you've gained enough experience to be better than the average thief, instead of less than the average thief. And of course, a lot of games, most games have level caps so that you can only get so powerful. And that's just so that you have a reason to finish the game, and or so that it's for balance in multiplayer games, so that someone who spends 500 hours isn't significantly at an advantage to someone who spent 480 hours. There should be some kind of threshold that represents peak player power, and players can get closer and closer to that without crossing it over. And progression slows down over time to create balance. Of course, if you design a level cap for a game, you can release expansions that expand that level cap, and that very frequently gives players a reason to come back to the game world. You were as powerful as you could be, but now there's additional room for growth by tackling new game content. Question for the class: best end game experience you've had, and how was it designed in order to be a good end game experience? Let's go 1, then 2.
Witcher 3 Blood and Wine. That's like it's an expansion.
Yeah,
as opposed
expansion.
to the end game.
Yeah.
It just does everything right. It raises your max level cap. It increases it. It makes it where you can craft things, upgrade your gear better.
Yeah.
It unlocks a new tier of upgrading, and then also just like makes you feel like what you had as at the end game being so strong and just so competent. All of a sudden, you're like, oh man, I'm more strong. That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
I think Subnautica is a really good film. Just because like as you progress through the game and get closer to the end, you feel it like the advanced technology you have towards the end. It didn't have to begin. It's like the game doesn't tell you, but you feel, you know?
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. When the narrative, it can even have a narrative reason, but it's inherent in the gameplay. You feel the difference in the gameplay for the end of the game. Yeah.
Like Hollow Knight and also Hollow Knight Silk Song, where you get movement progression as you go. And so by the end of the game, it's not necessarily that you're more powerful. There are parts of your kit that are just objectively more powerful than the start, but you also have more ability to just navigate that fight.
Yep. Sure. Even the navigation, it feels different to play because of the changes in movement. Yeah.
kind of in the same vein, as you, every 2 levels in Fallout games, you can gain skills that give you more things that you can do or enhance your already existing abilities.
Yep.
I've always been a sucker for the progression in games like Metroid Prime and stuff like that, where you don't start off with much and you just kind of have a set path of, oh, this is what I can do.
Mhm.
But then as you get more abilities and you get more like power-ups and like weapons you can use, you get to open up paths in like previous parts of the game
Mhm.
that give you more stuff or just let you get to more parts of the game in general.
Yeah. So kind of a map based. There's a reason to go back to what you've done before because there's something that you might not have noticed there that expands on what was there.
Also, about I think the end game experience in The Witcher feels so good is because I think there are still things that are stronger than you, and it still like emphasizes the fact that like The Witcher is still just a human, even though they're like a dope mutated human. They're still just a person. And like, yeah, you're not as strong as some of these things. That's just impossible for your max strength to be as strong as this crazy ancient witch, you know? So it's like, but you still feel capable.
Yeah.
The raids and Destiny games.
Yeah.
A lot of fun. They kind of take like everything that you learned from like all the items that you got from all over the game, doing other stuff, into like one really hard thing at the end of the game.
Yeah, and then it's repeatable so that you can continue to acquire, spend to do the really difficult thing. Go acquire, spend to do the really difficult thing.
Yeah, you can raid to get better at raids.
Yep.
Like the villager ranking in like Minecraft, like if you're able to
Mhm.
protect the village, villagers give you better trade deals and stuff like that.
Yep. My go-to for the best end game experience I've ever experienced, Path of Exile 1.
Could you repeat that?
Path of Exile 1. I don't have 10,000 hours in that game. No.
Oh my god. The entire game is
Yeah. The entire story is the tutorial, basically. Your first character, 20 or 40 hours into the game, you're just like, wow, all right, I've experienced everything. Oh, wait.
So wait, like Proto Dark Souls.
There's just so much there. There's so much potential character growth. There's so much to focus on, to do, to craft, to make, to acquire.
Oh, it's like if Diablo actually did their Paragon system correctly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, if you haven't played Path of Exile 1, I probably can't praise it enough. I've kind of gotten my time out of it. I don't really go back to it as much anymore, but goodness, that was a good 12 years of my life. There's a lot to that game that makes you think, makes you plan, makes you appreciate. A series of developers who enjoy making you think. All right. We're starting to get into the fun part of the class where we are really going to start talking about how to dive into these mechanics and understand them so that you can design for what you want your players to experience. It's one thing to have been in that position of the player and experienced what other people have designed for you, but stepping behind the scenes of that and becoming the designer of an experience is something that is very different. You can't just have a good idea and then make that good idea without understanding exactly how it works underneath the hood and prescribing that process. So let's talk about numerical relationships in games. There is the trade-off relationship. This is when one player will give one thing to another in exchange for something else. There are progression relationships. How does player progress increase over time? How are we expecting players to acquire resources of value in the game? This can be experience, levels, narrative progress, improved player skill, really any of this. But all of those are progression in some way, shape, or form. So it's not just mathematical. We need to be aware of what our players are perceiving, but we need to know also what tools we have at our disposal to craft that player perception, to change the player's perception of the games that we are designing for them. Numbers in games are never absolute. I shouldn't say never. They're rarely absolute, as the slide says. but it's always relative. So if I can deal 100 damage with my sword and the enemy has 400 life, that's the same as if I deal 1 damage with my sword and the enemy has 4 life, or any other scalar of that. So the relationship between damage and health doesn't matter what the actual numerical value is. What matters is the relative value of damage to health. So how will that advance throughout your game? If you can figure that out, then you're planning for the player's perception of your game based on an anticipated set of actions through the game that are designed to reward them at those points. So let's look at trade-off relationships in a bit more detail. We talked about time, but time is the main trade-off. The player gives you time and gets back the experience within the game. Designing a game and all of the objects in that game based on the amount of time that it takes the player to do the task that gives them that item is a great way to design around utilizing the player's time. So many different curve types make sense for different mechanics. We can start with the identity curve. Who knows the identity curve? You get back in what you put it, you get back out what you put in.
They're like mathematically?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, sure. They were like psychologically or something.
Yeah. that would make that a little harder. So there's the identity curve, there's the linear curve, polynomial, exponential, logarithmic. For each of these curves, let's start thinking about how we might utilize them and what mechanics craft or make sense with them. So let's take out a piece of paper and see if we can come up with identity, linear, polynomial, exponential, and logarithmic game mechanics.
Or you didn't want.
No. This is just brainstorming.
No.
How is linear different than identity?
No.
Linear can scale. It's a proportion. So identity is a straight. It is a version of linear. It's a value of linear, but it's not. There are other mechanics that might make more sense that scale at different linear rates than just the identity rate.
I think the thing is in my head, I can see like all of these being used for like, it's like I can see a lot of these being used for the same mechanic.
Yeah.
But then the way that I would do the relational mechanics would be different. It's like if I have like a level scaling that is like linear, then I'd have the XP gain from like some creature. So to prevent like mindless grinding, it would be logarithmic where it like start dropping off at the end. But if it's exponential, then doing that's just not punishing, like it's just not fair. So you really would have, if it's an exponential like leveling amount of XP for level up, then with a linear like
there are games that handle these differently, but when you state what that mechanic would, maybe state what assumptions you're making in order to use that as the curve for that mechanic.
You do polynomial, right? Like the only way to really like differentiate that from exponential is if you take advantage of like the peaks and valleys, right? So it's like, would that be something like, okay, like I've geared up enough to where low level enemies mean nothing to me, but then there's like these sort of like higher level minions of like a boss, and then you have a boss which is a peak, and then you go to the next phase, and then you're back dealing with like the low level enemies again, and then you get like the higher level sort of like closer minions to the boss, and then you hit the boss, and you just keep getting that peak and valley. Is that the kind of idea?
I think that would be like a sine wave more so than
Okay.
than polynomial. Think of a polynomial as only the positive axis of either a quadratic function, cubic function.
Polynomials can be anything, and like stuff like that. Like you can combine factors to where they kind of bend in all these strange shapes. At least that's my viewpoint. Anyway, I'm sorry. What
Yeah,
was
no,
it?
you can think of it as a growth function. So without combining it, think of it as a growth function that is fast but not exponential fast.
Okay. Right. It's like states out later presence mention. It's kind of some question.
Anyone have any ideas you want to share?
I was thinking for exponential, maybe like an MMO is kind of an example.
What mechanic within an MMO?
Just kind of that grinding, you're getting more powerful. You're just kind
So
of
is it the experience needed for next level? Is it what mechanic within
just
an
kind of,
MMO?
yeah, like experience. Like you start off and you do a few things, and oh, there's a few levels. But then as you continue to do it,
It gets harder and harder.
Yeah,
Does it make
exactly.
more sense to make that polynomial or exponential? What are you assuming is your exponent in the exponential in that case? Are you doing something that's 2 to the n, that's 3 to the n, that's 1.1 to the n, that's
something that just kind of makes it take more time the more
yeah.
you
Yeah.
go through it.
I find that a lot of people they can't decide between polynomial and exponential for something. I'm not necessarily saying that that's the case here, but that is a very big distinction to make, and it has very large effects on how a mechanic feels or plays out, especially in the longer term, the bigger picture. There's something back.
I guess depends on how you look at the game or how long you want it to take.
Yeah,
Some games like World of Warcraft, you can max out a character in a couple weeks, right? But then there's games like RuneScape where, level 92 is halfway to pay then.
yep,
So it scales like crazy.
yep.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember the exact experience curve in final right now. I want to say at the beginning of the current X pack it was 2 million XP for a level. And at the end, it's about 40 million per level.
Yep.
And it just, it creeps up. I just can't figure out in my head what that relationship is.
Yeah.
What is good a mechanic that represents something that's exponential then?
So you can absolutely do something exponential, but if it's going to double with every time,
But what would be like a good example of that, I guess, is what I mean?
yeah, you can use it for experience. You can use it for incrementals, use it all the time with regards to what goes up linearly is the value of the exponent, which means that there is an exponential curve to the actual currency itself. And when you gain a new exponent, it's like gaining it turns that exponential into a linear, which is interesting. I'll say if we have 1, then 2.
Let's say, player speed.
Yeah.
Movement speed. Acceleration.
Yeah, okay, sure, that makes sense.
For linear, I just thought of like the actual percentage of story progression. Most like what good games, like you don't want to finish 50% of the story in an hour and then the next 50 takes 50 hours or vice versa. It
Right.
would make sense. Like you can exponentially grow your like power, but also if the difficulty of the game exponentially grows with that, then the actual like percentage you're progressing will be linear. And
Yeah.
the player can decide how steep they want that. They can play it faster or slower.
Yeah, player power feels really good as a linear progression. I find that if you dump an extra 10 hours into the game, you're twice as strong. Something like that as a way of the player is consistently feeling like they're gaining something out of it. It can also be logarithmic. I find single player feels best if it's linear. Multiplayer feels better if it's logarithmic, where you gain a lot of that power early, but then you really have to work for increases in player power gain later on.
For these, oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was thinking like to me, and I don't think a lot of games do this, but it seems like it would make sense to have kind of an identity curve on like player experience versus time. Like the amount of time you put into the game should be related pretty equally to the amount of experience you get. If you're doing things that are like things you're supposed to be doing,
Right.
As in terms of not just like wandering the world and hanging out and playing dogs, right?
Do they, I mean, I know that obviously a lot of these things are probably hard coded in some mathematical way, but when people are designing games around these ideas, is it more like I want the player experience to feel like it's going on a logarithmic curve rather than like a linear curve? Like a lot of these things feel like they're like heuristics more than like something that you're like, we will make this an exponential curve rather than it's like,
It becomes the right decision for what you want to prescribe, what you want the player to feel. If you want the player to feel like they're consistently making progress, then you don't want to use a logarithmic curve because it will fall off reasonably quickly. And then only the absolute diehard players will be willing to spend twice as long to make the same gain. That's what logarithmic is going to say, is that for each point that you're going to gain, for each one you're going to go up, each one takes twice as long as the last one. So you get your first one in 1 minute, you get your second one in 2 minutes, you get your third one in 4 minutes, your fourth one in 8 minutes. Very quickly, by the time you get to 20 of that, you're spending a year or longer in order to get the same thing that you got at the beginning of the game in 1 minute. So if there's a very quick end to that progress, then logarithmic might make sense, but just recognizing that it's inverse exponential, that the amount of time that it's going to take to do something is doubling each time. That's kind of scary. And maybe that's the right choice, maybe it's the wrong choice.
In Noida, at the end of each area, you can use gold to re-roll which of the abilities that you're being shown as options. And it doubles in price every single re-roll. So,
right.
You know, if you want to max out how many good abilities am I going to get for the run, you have to spend a lot more time fighting enemies and exploring the stage. Before
but as you go deeper, you get a faster and faster rate of growth of your currency. So it doesn't truly feel like it's twice as much time. You take the ratio of the cost over the increase in resource growth, and that can create, it's possibly still exponential, but instead of really being something like 2 to the n, it's more like 1.5 to the n or 1.3 to the n by the time you factor in the ratio of that growth. So yeah, that's a very good point.
Also, I think some mechanics in games feel exponential, but they aren't actually exponential. Like, I think something that comes to mind is like the Call of Duty zombies. Like, at some point, you're just like, what's even happening? There's too many of these things, and it feels like something that's exponential, but there's no way it actually is.
Yeah, exponential is an incredibly fast rate of growth. I've probably said this before in another class. We'll do this while you pack up. Is that if you folded a piece of paper over and over and over again, how many folds do you need in order for it to be the width of the observable universe? Are we familiar with that problem?
I heard of it, but it's pretty loose.
It's not 11. It's not quite that crazy.
I know it's like for the moon, it's like 64.
It is 63, I think, for the width of the observable universe.
Oh.
It's 40 something to the moon and 60 something for the observable universe.
Yeah.
Some weird thing about it.
Yeah, but that's how many repetitions of doubling it takes for something that you can barely see to something that's the width of the observable universe. So exponential growth is a very scary thing to apply to a game. It has to be prescribed and make sure that you're doing that in a way that you know what that's going to be like to the player before you make that decision. We'll talk about this more tomorrow.
You mean the ending had to be like scaled down by not really 100 across